Hello everybody, welcome to 文明客厅读书会. Today we continue to read Robert Spalding's book, Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. Robert Spalding retired from the U.S. Air Force as a brigadier general after more than 26 years of service. He completed his career as the Senior Director for Strategic Planning to the President at the National Security Council and was the Chief Architect for the National Security Strategy. He is a former China strategist for the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff and Joint Staff at the Pentagon, as well as a senior defense official and defense attaché to China. He earned his doctorate in economics and mathematics from the University of Missouri and is fluent in Mandarin. Chapter 7: Politics and Diplomacy. War is a mere continuation of policy by other means. Karl von Clausewitz, a German military theorist, wrote those words 2 centuries ago. He was referring to public policy, another name for politics. Military scholars then generally interpret this statement as saying that politics and war are synonymous. And that means politics can be viewed as a continuation of war by other means. This makes perfect sense where China is concerned. What Clausewitz is saying, that war is a political act or a political decision used to drive an outcome in the winner's favor, can be applied to the CCP strategy. The CCP uses political and diplomatic engagement and deception to gain control and expand China's sphere of influence without going to war. This echoes the brilliant central idea of both Sun Tzu's The Art of War and Unrestricted Warfare. To get what you want without going into battle. The Chinese have absorbed this lesson. They understand the risks and damage of war. For thousands of years, they have been farmers, not fighters. They built the Great Wall to try to eliminate war. So their solution is to pick up on Clausewitz's theory and sort of turn it on its head. China says, war, we are not going to play that game. Instead, China views politics and diplomacy as the battlefield, although it takes pains not to seem like the aggressor. The CCP uses guile, cunning, bribery, and bargaining to achieve desired outcomes. Or, to put it in real-world terms, its entire strategy is built around political influence, information, and buying people off. The heart of political and diplomatic warfare, influencing, is a two-step process. First, it requires knowing who pulls the levers, that is, who has the clout to make things happen. Second, it requires getting those people to do your dirty work by convincing them that they are serving their own best interest. In other words, Chinese diplomacy seeks to manipulate targets so they don't realize they are doing the CCP's dirty work. To do this, China convinces other countries that it is a good neighbor or partner and is genuinely trying to help their partners help themselves. There is little doubt that this ploy drives the vast majority of deals as China unfurls its projected $1.3 trillion Belt and Road infrastructure plan for developing nations. By building a global network of connected railroads, highways, and ports throughout 2/3 of the world, China can talk a great game about helping countries participate in the worldwide economy. But it also puts the CCP in a position to control that economy and exploit all the data that is generated as people and goods move around the world. No conflict, no confrontation, win-win cooperation is the CCP's sly slogan. The same "trust us and let us help you" idea is used again and again as China strikes deals all over the globe, and as it offers to build deep ports, as it has in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Greece, and other nations. It's easy to see how a developing nation can be lured by what might seem like favorable terms and generous revenue projections, all pitches as strengthening its economy. It's easy to imagine that nation's leaders saying, "This is good for while Chinese diplomats nod in agreement. What is rarely discussed is how the leaders entering these agreements may also benefit from kickbacks, sweetheart side deals, and other enhancements. If you can convince somebody that the things they are doing are in their own best interest, then that's the easiest way to get them to act." Just ask any corpsman. He will tell you the same thing. If you can align your rival's motives politely, without any coercion, by subtle influence and clever words, by offering access to money, or by wielding false information that masks onerous terms, you are winning the war. The word diplomacy has evolved. Today, it conjures up images of careful, polite negotiation, but it hasn't always been viewed that way. Diplomacy is conducted, of course, by diplomats, and that brings up another worthy centuries-old quote. An ambassador is an honest man sent to lie abroad for the good of his country. This line was uttered by a man who personified the dignified image of diplomacy. Sir Henry Wharton was a poet and art connoisseur who served as England's ambassador to Venice in the early 17th century. China uses both forms of diplomacy. Ideally, it relishes operating behind the scenes when it comes to negotiation. While transparency is a hallmark of good governance in the West, discussing policy in public, issuing statements to the media, is something Chinese diplomats actively discourage. When I began working as a military attaché in Beijing, I was told by the Chinese that making policy issue public was tantamount to offending the feeling of 1.4 billion Chinese people. That, of course, is absurd. How is publicly discussing any international issue an offense? And yet, when I arrived at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, this attitude of not publicly calling China out on issues had permeated the U.S. federal government. I don't know if this policy was in place during the Clinton or Bush administrations, although I suspect that it was given their inaction on China. But instructions from the Obama administration were loud and clear. We are not going to do anything in public to antagonize China, as the relationship is too significant financially. The narrative was that the two most powerful countries in the world had to cooperate and get along to solve great challenges, like North Korea and climate change. That stance was built on the absurd idea that China wants to fix either of these issues. It doesn't. North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, lives and breathes by the will of the CCP, which loves having him act like a totalitarian madman and divert attention away from the Beijing's government's oppressive actions. This is no exaggeration. An estimated 50,000 North Koreans are working daily in Chinese factories, basically funding an underground economy in North Korea. And when it comes to Kim building intercontinental ballistic missiles, who logically would have supplied his broke and embargoed nation with those plans? As for the environment and climate change, China's overfishing is destroying fisheries across the globe. When its trawlers are caught red-handed in foreign waters, it issues denials or announces increased vigilance. But the next day, Chinese ships are out raiding the ocean again. Meanwhile, China remains the world's worst polluter, springing more carbon into the air than any other nation on Earth. But even in this realm, it sidesteps the rules. One brilliant thing China has done, tactically speaking, is build coal-fired electricity plants in neighboring countries, including Russia, then pipe the energy across the border. So China can claim it is reducing the amount of carbon it generates by outsourcing the problem across the border, while it remains responsible for poisoning the air as much, if not more, than ever. The carbon maneuver underscores how China has mastered the other form of diplomacy, spin. Chinese diplomats focus on good optics, portraying their positions as helpful, issuing sound bites that ooze with goodwill, and hosting elaborate conferences and junkets designed to showcase their generosity and do-good visions. But these carefully constructed exchanges are often distractions, misdirections, or total lies designed to disarm suspicion and sway popular opinion. While the Russian practice atomization, breaking down society into rival groups, the Chinese practice obfuscation, clouding, and cloaking behaviors. It's the opposite of transparency. Policy moves are conducted in secret, motives hidden, until deals are signed, sealed, and delivered. These two philosophies of influence, one loud, one quiet, actually work in tandem. Russia's activity serves as a distraction while China walls out the back door with the loot. Finally, in the event that diplomacy fails and friendly overturns of contract offers, trade terms, payouts, and infrastructure building deals fall through, the old methods such as intimidation, bullying, bribery, misinformation, and extortion can get a job done. Such tactics have more to do with thuggery than diplomacy, but it ends increasing the CCP's influence over not just the foreign governments and corporations, but also media outlets, religious groups, academics, civil rights groups, and at a frighteningly granular level, individual citizens. Justify the means. Sadly, none of this bullying practice should surprise anyone. These diplomats and influence peddlers represent a country that routinely ignore international trade laws, property laws, environmental laws, drug laws, and pretty much any other law that stand in its way. The first rule of unrestricted warfare, said Colonel Qiao Liang, co-author of the book on the subject, explaining the strategy he envisioned, is that there are no rules, with nothing forbidden. Welcome to Chinese diplomacy. Influencing influencers. China pushes two levers to quietly achieve diplomatic influence: access to Chinese markets and access to money. In the United States, the lure of access to Chinese markets has been cast year after year. As we've discussed, it's been pretty clear that China has used this as a carrot on a stick to drive Wall Street and the investment community into a fever dream of future earnings. These visions are fantasies as long as China insists that earnings must remain in China. When China does disperse huge sums of money in America, it is to gain information, technology, or influence. To wield those two weapons effectively, China's diplomatic wing has distilled its mission into two tasks: identifying people of influence and then swaying them. Tellingly, these guidelines are not that different from the rules driving many intelligence and counterintelligence operations to develop spies. For the CCP, ideal targets are people with political clout, who either make decisions or advise people who make decisions. At highest levels, CCP diplomats woo the presidents, prime ministers, and cabinet leaders of foreign governments. In the United States, Chinese operatives, businessmen, journalists, students, and military officers, as well as members of the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., or its mission in New York, zoom in on senators, members of Congress, and military officers for influence operations. But to reach those targets, they may also reach out to a senator's wife, or the employer of a senator's wife, or, as in the case of Joe Biden, a vice president's son. Engagement is a crucial requirement for influencing operations. It may start with a meeting invitation, an offer to share a meal or attend a conference, or an offer to launch a joint venture. From there, relationships build and deals are struck. Sometimes, these influencing operations can be blatantly obvious, such as the deal to back Hunter Biden's investment fund with $1 billion. There are plenty of targets for China influencers. For instance, there are 100 senators and 435 members of the House of Representatives, and every single one of them, for various reasons, is interested in money and access to foreign markets. A DC dancer. On November 8, 2017, Montana Senator Steve Daines issued a press release proudly announcing that he had secured a deal with the Montana Stock Growers Association and JD.com, one of China's largest retailers, which had agreed to purchase a minimum of $200 million in Montana-sourced beef over the next several years. The deal marked an end to China's ban on buying meat from American ranchers, which had been in effect since 2003. The agreement also included another boon for Montana's cattle industry. JD.com pledged to seek to invest up to another $100 million to build a processing plant in Big Sky County. Never mind that the wording of that phrase means JD.com isn't obligated to spend a dime on a phrase means JD.com a dime on a processing plant and hadn't, according to a July 2018 China Daily Report. If you didn't think about it too much, it sure sounded good. At the end of the press release, Dance listed 18 meetings and actions he had taken to make this happen, including trips to China, meetings with Chinese ambassadors, and meetings with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. In other words, he has doing his job and trying to serve the people of Montana, right? It's more complicated than that. Less than 1 month later, Dianne hosted a delegation of CCP legislators who oversaw the People's Congress of China's Tibet Autonomous Region. The visit, complete with beaming photo opportunity, was clearly timed to offset something else going on in town, specifically a DC visit by Tibetan leader Lapsang Samgay, who was meeting with lawmakers and attending a December 6 House Foreign Affairs Asia Subcommittee hearing on Chinese repression in Tibet. Samgay, viewed as an enemy by the CCP, was on hand to put pressure on China to give foreign diplomats the same access to Tibet that Chinese officials who oversee Tibet enjoy on visits to the United States. As the Washington Post columnist reported, the episode illustrated China's growing practice of enlisting Western politicians to blunt criticism of the regime, and also its determination to hunt its opponents wherever they travel. Everywhere I go, I'm followed by a high-level Chinese delegation denying human rights abuse in Tibet, Samgay told the paper, adding that Chinese officials pressure governments across the world not to meet with him. There is nothing beyond circumstantial evidence to suggest that Dianne's meeting was the result of a formal quid pro quo agreement with China. But the cause and effect seem apparent. After receiving $200 million in business for his state, he helped China blunt negative press over its repressive and democratic and unrelenting control over Tibet. Silencing the voice of America. Sometimes China has been able to apply a pressure to silence dissident, even right here in free speech-loving America. And just when it looks like nothing more than political pressure, the dark shadow of money clouds events. Sasha Gong, a journalist who was the chief of Mandarin service for the Voice of America, VOA, learned this the hard way in 2017 when she scheduled an interview with Chinese billionaire Guo Wengui, who also goes by the name Miles Kwok. Guo is a controversial figure, both at home and abroad. He made his money developing real estate. In 2014, he fled China and became a vocal critic of CCP leadership, accusing top leaders of rampant corruption and self-dealing. He named names and launches blockbuster charges. Some have been substantiated, others have not. He also became a critic of the CCP's human rights abuse. This combination of his wealth, insider knowledge, and shocking tales of abuse made him one of the most intriguing figures operating outside China's borders. So he was a natural subject for Gong to approach. Guo was interested in talking to the Voice of America. The government-funded news service is rarely heard within U.S. borders, but since launching in 1942, it has engaged an enormous worldwide audience and has added digital and TV programming to its 24/7 lineup of radio broadcasts. Its operations are guided by a 3-point charter that President Ford signed into law in 1976. Number 1, VOA will serve as a consistently reliable and authoritative source of news. VOA news will be accurate, objective, and comprehensive. Number 2, VOA will represent America, not any single segment of American society, and will therefore present a balanced and comprehensive projection of significant American thoughts and institutions. Number 3, VOA will present the policies of the United States clearly and effectively, and will also present responsible discussions and opinions on these policies. Despite that nothing but truth and balance mission, Gore was concerned about how he would be portrayed in the interview. He had been unhappy with the way a recent BBC piece about him had been edited, and he told Gong he would agree to an interview if it was broadcast live. Gong responded with her own request for a 3-hour interview, with the first hour beaming live on radio and the next 2 hours broadcast via the internet. She also insisted on having a day of interviews with Gore on background, so she and a co-anchor could ensure that the presentation would be well-structured and balanced. Gore agreed. When Gong told her boss at VOA, she was congratulated for pulling off a coup. The scheduled project was a 1-hour simulcast on satellite TV and VOA Internet channels, followed by a 2-hour web-only engagement, during which Gore would respond to questions posted on social media. It required the involvement of about 60 people at VOA, according to Gong, including the publicity team, a social media specialist, producers, sound engineers, camera operators, lighting techs, and travel and logistic personnel. The project must have been signed off on, Gong notes, because I sure did not have the power to arrange all this. The interview was scheduled to take place live at Gore's luxurious apartment on the top floor of the Sherry Netherland Hotel on New York's Fifth Avenue. It would begin at 9 a.m. Eastern Time on April 19, 2017. Given the 12-hour time difference, it would air in China during prime time. At 9 p.m. on Friday, April 14, the VOA released a promotional spot. It publicized the exclusive interview and touted that Gore has promised to deliver nuclear-level explosives, according to Gong. It's important to know that the CCP controls the media in China. It also owns most Chinese-language foreign media outlets around the globe. So dissidents like Gore are literally almost never given airtime either within China or on government-owned channels that target the Chinese diaspora, such as the China Global Television Network, which broadcasts on cable networks here in the United States. So the VOA, by interviewing Gore, was providing him with a rare large platform to reach the Chinese-speaking world, a platform the CCP constantly denies to pro-democracy dissidents. No one that Gong worked with at VOA voiced any concern to her about dramatically hyping the interview. Evidently, they were aware of the journalistic value of the Gore scoop, and that promoting a story is that what media outlets do when they have a big exclusive. But the promotion was clearly monitored by authorities in China. The following Monday, the first business day after the promote aired, Chinese authorities announced an arrest warrant for Gore. He had fled China in 2014, but now that he was scheduled to beam into Chinese airwaves and possibly criticize the CCP, the government was formally moving to silence him. Meanwhile, two members of the Chinese Foreign Ministry paid a visit to the VOA correspondent in Beijing. He sent an email to Gong reporting that his visitors had said the CCP believed that by airing the Guo interview, the VOA was interfering with internal affairs and with the 19th Communist Party's Congress. When I read this, Gong records, I said, how the hell is interviewing a businessman interfering with the party Congress? I called the office and I said, tell them to go to hell. I don't care about this threat. A senior editor voiced concerns about making sure the interview was balanced, a well-meaning but demeaning suggestion to Gong, who has been a journalist for years. I said, don't worry about it. I know how to be balanced. The VOA offices were then hit with an onslaught of phone calls from the Chinese embassy in DC. One editor called me and asked what to do. I said, what are they saying? The editor told me they said, if you do the interview, it will permanently damage the relationship between the Chinese government and the Voice of America. I said, just tell them Voice of America has no relationship with the Chinese government, except we cover you. We report on you. The final 24 hours before the interview was set to air were a nightmare for Gong. She recounts an epic screaming match with VOA Deputy Director Sandy Shukamawara, who asked her to cancel the interview. An intimidating crowd of Chinese men followed Gong when he left Guo's apartment. Later, the program's executive producer told her she would refuse a request to air a 15-minute live interview and prepare a 30-minute tape. During all this, Gong, who suffers from high blood pressure, worried he might need to be hospitalized. Finally, the day ended with a conference call with 7 VOA editors and administrators in 2 languages, in which no one agreed to take responsibility for pulling the interview. All these people were so cowardly. Gong recalls, they could not even give one word to make the order. They wanted me to make the order. I'm not going to do that. As all this behind-the-scenes drama was unfolding, the director of the VOA, Amanda Bennett, was touring Africa, had calls from the Chinese embassy, made it through to her office. It seems likely, given all the other VOA offices that had been called. Furthermore, insiders note, Bennett, a seasonal journalist, had tangential connections to Beijing. Her husband, Donald Graham, the former publisher of the Washington Post, is the chairman of Graham Holdings Company, the owner of education services company Kaplan Inc., which has a division in China. Given that China sends more foreign students to the United States than any other country in the world, it is presumably a huge market opportunity for Kaplan. Sometimes after midnight, just hours before the scheduled interview, reports from inside China claim that Beijing had issued a code red warrant for Guo's immediate arrest by Interpol. Gong now wondered whether her subject would be available and whether they would even be able to access the equipment they had placed in Guo's apartment. They arrived to discover that the reports were bogus. Guo had heard nothing, and Interpol hadn't received a request. 2 minutes before the interview was to start, the entire internet connection for the Sherry Netherlands, the luxury building where Guo lived, crashed. According to Gong, the FBI later determined that a hacker in Shanghai had attacked the building. Fortunately, the VOA team had its own battery-powered transmitters, and broadcast went on as scheduled. Gong's broadcast went on for 1 hour and 15 minutes, and then was shut down. According to Gong, the decision was made by Bennett. Gong and other members of the Guo broadcast team were suspended soon after the broadcast. Months later, Gong and 2 of her team were officially fired. A letter from the VOA to Gong dated November 29, 2018, asserted that her actions were intentional, unforgettable, and harmful to the well-being of the agency, and accused her of ignoring instruction given by the uppermost and most senior employees of the agency. The same day, Bennett released an email to the VOA staffers stating that the dismissals followed 4 independent investigations that all concluded that the interview's termination was a result of VOA leadership's attempt to enforce previously agreed upon journalistic standards. The investigation found no evidence to support an allegation that pressure from the Chinese government, purportedly driven by spies within VOA, had caused the termination. The email further stated, VOA leadership issued specific instructions to the interview team to, number 1, limit the interview to no more than 1 hour. Number 2, prohibit any extension of the interview over social media. Number 3, prohibit any use of unverified documentation or materials during the broadcast. Number 4, continue to tape the interview for as long as necessary to produce material for later, properly vetted broadcast. Gong says she has no illusions about what happened. She believes that the voice of America was silenced and intimidated by Chinese government pressure. I'm quite convinced that Bennett was subjected to Chinese influence, because it made no sense, professionally speaking, for her to intervene in my interview so decisively and strongly, especially because she and her deputy had no idea about the content of the interview. As for the pressure applied to Bennett, Gong alluded to Bennett's husband's business interests in China. The Chinese created a new way of legal bribery. They don't need to pay for agents, just give them business opportunities. Regardless of the counter charges of intersubordination and influencing, the story itself is shocking. The premier American government news organization censored its coverage because, apparently, broadcasting an interview that contained criticism of the Chinese government was somehow not up to journalistic standards. Giving voice to the opposition is something that the VOA had done for decades. But in the wake of complaints from our greatest rival and biggest trading partner, the opposition was silenced. Influence infiltration. Although China had been targeting developing nations all over the world, from the Congo to El Salvador, from the Philippines to Greece, with diplomatic initiatives that result in direct cash infusion, infrastructure investment, and other goodies, it had not been ignoring the United States. No, not by a long shot. Since 2004, the Chinese government had been funding Confucius institutions at American universities. The vast majority of these centers provide Mandarin language instruction for these schools and are staffed with teachers from China, while the institutes also frequently offer cultural programming and other services, including outreach classes for K-12 students in local schools. The big win for most colleagues is a robust language program that administrators can effectively outsource with minimal expense. Officially, China insists that the CIs, the Confucius institutions are non-profit public institutions devoted to promoting Chinese culture and language for foreign countries, and that party line had been effective. The lure of low-cost quality language institution has been a strong selling point. There were more than 90 Confucius institutions in place at American colleges and universities by 2017, and more than 500 among the globe. But the party line is a bunch of BS. While every center is administered by co-directors, one appointed by China and one by the school. Frequent reports of censorship and a lack of academic freedom emanates from Confucius institutions. No such report was more disturbing, perhaps, than a decision by North Carolina State University to cancel a scheduled visit by the Dalai Lama, Tibet's exiled religious and political leader, after the school's Confucius institution director warned the event might harm strongly relationships we were developing with China. Was that a concern or a threat? Judging by the cancellation, the administration eventually took it as a threat that would hurt the university, and it caved to pressure. There have been other reports of censorious behavior and manipulation stemming from Confucius institution. The Chinese Confucius Institution co-director at the University of Albany in New York pulled down posters about Taiwan before his bosses from the Chinese Ministry of Education showed up. A U.S. Senate subcommittee report noted that in one state with a number of K-12 Confucius classrooms, an email was sent warning against booking a drama company with ties to Falun Gong, the spiritual group banned in China. For those schools who have recently been awarded Confucius classroom funds, please note that they may not be used to support attendance and or sponsoring of Shen Yun performances. 10 years after the first Confucius institution at the University of Maryland opened its doors, the American Association of University Professors issued a report denouncing the centers for engaging in academic censorship. The report urged universities to shutter the Confucius institutions or demand new agreements that would protect academic freedoms. Confucius institutions function as an arm of the Chinese state and are allowed to ignore academic freedom. Their academic activities are under the supervision of Hanban, a Chinese state agency which is chaired by a member of political and vice premier of the People's Republic of China. Most agreements establishing Confucius institutions feature non-disclosure clauses and unacceptable concessions to the political aims and practice the government of China. Specifically, North American universities permit Confucius institutes to advance a state agenda in the recruitment and control of academic staff, in the choice of curriculum and restriction of debate. That criticism has started to take root, and some institutions are beginning to banish these propaganda-fueled centers. This wouldn't make American university completely free of Chinese influence and potential censorship, though China has another method of holding a sway over American universities if it chooses to use it. Infiltration by tuition. More than 350,000 Chinese students were enrolled in U.S. universities in 2017. That means that 32.5% of total 1.08 million international college students in the United States were from China. Since annual tuition fees for state institutions average about $25,000 and fees for private college average about $35,000 and counting. Let's assume these Chinese students each pay $30,000. That's more than $10 billion being pumped into the U.S. higher education systems every year. And considering that figure doesn't factor in room, board, travel, or entertainment, it's safe to say that China's college students generate 15 to 20 billion US dollars windfall every year to schools and their communities. China has a vested interest in sending its students here. For one thing, the United States is regarded as having the best higher education system in the world. For another, sending students here is part and parcel of China's goal to obtain technology. Chinese students are contracted by diplomats and business representatives and instructed to obtain useful technology. But suppose a school like New York University, the most popular higher education destination for Chinese students in the United States, with an estimated 3,000 enrolled annually, hires leading dissidents and outspoken critics of Beijing to teach classes. What if China threatens to pull all funding for Chinese students at NYU who pay, say, 47,000 US dollars in tuition for the private university? That would be 141 million in vanished revenue, plus millions more for room and board. Given that, if China complains about dissident professors or curriculum that is critical of China's policies, do you think it will be heard? I've been told that this exact scenario has played out at multiple universities across the country. The University of California at Berkeley has the second largest population of students from China. A professor there told me he once spotted the Chinese consul general on campus and asked what he was doing there. "Oh, nothing," came the reply. The professor was curious. He followed the official, who then walked into a meeting of Chinese students. The professor watched as the visitor warned students not to forget where they came from. "We are watching you, and you need to be good. You need to be faithful to China." It might seem that welcoming Chinese students to the United States and letting them experience a liberal culture where freedom of speech, religion, and politics is celebrated rather than persecuted would be the first step toward creating opposition to the CCP at home. Obviously, warnings like this from political operatives are one reason why U.S. universities are not turning out diplomacy-loving Chinese dissidents. In fact, Chinese students are advised not to fraternize extensively with American students and to maintain close contact with other Chinese foreign students. Given the China government's thirst for monitoring individual behavior, there is little doubt that these students are asked to report on one another. So instead of enjoying freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, fundamental American rights, these students are haunted by the authoritarian rules of their homeland. With the advent of social credit scores, the newly implemented data collection system that monitors, punishes, and rewards citizen behavior, in China and the long reach of digital surveillance, it is quite possible that Chinese students' liberal action abroad could be used to penalize family members back home, or even result in having their funding cut. The Chinese diaspora is another agent of influence for Beijing. An estimated 45 million Chinese speakers are living outside China and Taiwan, with roots to the mainland, and the CCP continually appeals to this population in all manner of ways. To the Chinese government, this is an informal but potent network, one that appeals to family, ancestry, identity, and nationhood. This can be powerful manipulated tools. The CCP used them to activate what they called non-traditional collectors. foreign-born Chinese who can become diplomatic or intelligence assets. They are often spurred into action, providing information, stealing secrets, attending rallies, writing letters by the win-win logic of their CCP handles. That logic is twofold. It's based on appeals to the pride and the patriotism in the Chinese nation, an idea that collectors can help themselves by being a patriot or maybe by accepting a payment and help the homeland, so-called homeland. When I was working at a defense attaché in Beijing, I flew with members of the PLA to a conference in Miami. The next day, the encouraged caught a flight to New York. The PLA members of the contingent were sitting at the front of the plane. I was seated in the back, surrounded by a number of Chinese-speaking Americans. My seatmates looked like they had been beaten up. They had bandage and visible scraps and even black eyes. 发生了什么? What happened? I asked. They told me they were members of Falun Gong and had been protesting the PLA presence and President Xi until they were attacked and beaten by a swarm of Chinese nationals. This tactic is deployed every time a CCP figure appears in the United States and protesters loom. A call goes out for all Chinese nationals in the area to mass in a show of support. But the other motive is to suppress protests physically. The Chinese nationals basically swarm around the protester, creating a barrier shielding them from prying eyes, and then pummel them. Once again, China denies freedom of speech right here, right now.